Great Britain's Royal Horticultural Society did a study where they found that talking to your plants really does make them grow faster and stronger. But the Horticultural Society found something they did not expect to find. Plants seem to respond better to the female voice rather than the male voice. Charles Darwin's great-granddaughter was one of the women involved in the study, and her plants, along with the other women's plants, responded quite positively. And what do you think Darwin's great-granddaughter read to the plants? Why, selections from her great-grandfather's book on the origin and survival of the species. Botanists rationalized that maybe it was because the female voice has more range. Maybe the plants could sense a variety of emotions and vulnerability. The last few weeks, I have been lifting up one of my favorite preachers, a preeminent preacher in this denomination by the name of Dr. Fred Craddock. The preeminent disciples preacher constantly prophesies to us in all of his writing that our assignment from heaven, 21 centuries after the canon has been written, is not just to hear the gospel, but to overhear the gospel. To overhear this text that was not written specifically for us, but yet to chew on it and think what it can mean to us 21 centuries later in this time and place. In this 21st century, those of us who love plants and sowing seeds might well think, well, with regard to the sower of which Jesus spoke, I could have guaranteed this sower a better crop. I would have preconditioned the soil before I started to sow. I know that seeds have a hard time coming up through rocks and thorns and bristles and shallow soil, so I would have done some plowing. Let's do some aerating. Come on, Jesus, let's control this story a little better. Let's make sure that the soil here is ready to receive the seeds. Your harvest, Jesus, in your harvest, Jesus, only the seeds that fell into good soil grew to a crop. That's only 25%. I, in the 21st century, can ensure a bumper crop. But perhaps Jesus came to this parable, which he took the time to explain, with a backstory of his own. You see, Jesus thought of himself as a seed. Jesus had been sown by the ultimate sower. Jesus was not just tossed into divided, bitter Israel, where the Judean Jews hated the Samaritan Jews and vice versa. Later in this chapter 13, we would find that Jesus would practically be run out of his hometown of Nazareth. Perhaps after all the great things he was known to have done, Jesus had hoped, like LeBron James returning to Cleveland, to have a hero's welcome when he got there. But instead, when he got to Nazareth, they looked at him and they said, can anything good come out of Nazareth? They were talking about not only him, but they were talking about all of themselves, saying that nothing good happens here. And you're nothing special, because we're nothing special. Life isn't that special. You have no right to call yourself anything special, much less the Son of God. They were so rude to Jesus in his hometown, so doubting of him, and thus the one who sowed him, that Jesus, responding to them, said that a prophet is not without honor except in his own country, shook the dust, the Nazareth dust, from his feet. The scripture tells us that Jesus left there unable to perform many of the miracles and do the deep teaching that he had done all over the Judean countryside. Yes, Jesus knew what it was like to be the Word made flesh, the good news, seed thrown among really rocky, thorny, shallow, unfertile soil. And of course, Jesus is not talking about seeds and plants here. He is talking about people and the circumstances where they find themselves trying to survive. This is a particularly poignant parable because these people, these Jews, like the people in Palestine, live off of the land. Their meals come not from some supermarket or some restaurant down the street and around the corner. Their meals come from right outside of their tents. They can practically hear their dinner growing at night. In addition, they didn't have our scientific knowledge of soil preparation or our access to fertilizers and miracle grow. So they just seeded everything everywhere and hoped for the best. They didn't have our job counselors and our school counselors and our family protection programs and our after-school programs or our online programs where they could process the dysfunction of their families or go somewhere if they needed it to get help. Like the seeds, they either made it or they didn't. Still, in this 21st century, with all of our helps and all of our support systems, we seeds still envy the success of other people, of all of its potential nutrients. As I have been fond of saying, and it seems to be getting more true every week, I am the oldest person here at Little White Chapel. But have any of you, through your parents, ever heard of a television actor from the middle of the 20th century? It's okay to say yes, you can say that your parents told you, by the name of Hugh O'Brien. Any of you ever heard of him? You all listen to your parents. He was on a television show called Wyatt Earp. Yeah. Well, Hugh O'Brien spent his off-camera time as a youth pastor and an ambassador to kids all over this nation. I could have been as great as they are. I could have risen as high as they did if my circumstances had been different. But you know I had such a hard time in my formative years. I didn't get along with mine, and I hated mine, and my parents were so, you can fill in the blank. When we spend all of our time envying other people or regretting our past, we deplete the soil into which we have been planted of all of its potential nutrients. Let me say that again. When we spend all of our time envying other people, or any of our time, envying other people, or regretting our past, we deplete the soil into which we have been planted. From an essay he wrote called The Freedom to Choose, he wrote these words. I do not believe we are all born equal. Created equal in the eyes of God, yes. But physical and emotional differences, parental guidelines, varying environments, being in the right place at the right time, all play a role in enhancing or limiting an individual's development. But I do believe every man and every woman, if given the opportunity and encouragement to recognize their potential, regardless of background, has that much more freedom to choose in our world. Will an individual be a taker or a giver in life? Will that person be satisfied merely to exist or seek a meaningful purpose? Will she or he dare to dream the impossible dream? I believe every person is created as the steward of his or her own destiny, with great potential and great power for a specific purpose to share with others through service, a reverence for life, and a spirit of love. It's pretty good for a cowboy, huh?